Hello and welcome back, and here I am at Shenzhen Baoan Airport. I've got my horrible flight socks and I want to talk to you about Terramaster. Now, while I've been over here in Shenzhen, China, I've been looking at different brands that we talk about here on the channel, and this video is going to be about Terramaster. Arguably, of all the brands that I visited throughout this and my previous trip to Shenzhen, the one that I've known the longest, the one that I've worked with the longest, and I wanted to learn more about their internal operations, their company culture, what they've got planned for 2026, and ultimately, should you trust them with your data? Now, the first thing I'm going to highlight throughout the course of this is, this video does not include their production facilities. This is just their offices, their marketing, their development, their research, their sales. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to access their production sites. And I know for a number of you that is going to be disappointing. Also, the amount of filming I could do at their location was quite limited. I was able to go around their office space, but they do have a confidentiality culture for their employees, and I was really only able to get around 10 to 15 minutes of stock footage outside of the meeting rooms that I was in. So again, I just wanted to load that right there up at the front. Now, the majority of the time was spent with Patrick, Shelley, Rita and Joanne at Terramaster there. Throughout the course of this video, we are going to talk about a few hardware features. We're also going to talk about TOS 7. TOS 7 is the latest iteration of their software, and going by their own reckoning, they're going for an update in their OS approximately every 2 years. And this one rolling out in beta, I believe, for the end of the year. Currently going through early alpha and beta testing for feedback with already confidential partners in a private sense, around about 100 different users, but it will open out to a public beta. On top of that, they wanted to highlight they've been in operation for 15 years, that they have around 100 members of staff there on site across the different offices. We saw around 50 or 60 people. We did see empty desks that were populated. At the main headquarters, again, maybe we've got the graphic of where we went during the day there. It was made up of the sales, R&D product team, and there was a second floor where the testing team was as well. Now, when I asked about how well they sell in China, they said around about a third. Now, unfortunately, once my colleague was making notes, we didn't isolate whether that was a third of their sales or they hold a third of the market there. So again, big question mark on the end there. Now, moving on to my questions, I walked in for about 10 different questions, some of which I'm going to isolate here, some of which I'll come back to later on. But for example, when I asked them about their internal security systems there, when they want to eliminate like bad actors, vulnerabilities, their response was that they use independent testing firms after their systems are created. Alongside that, they only use trusted suppliers that they revisit and double check on within every 6 to 12 months. And also all staff go through a vigorous vetting process. So again, I'm just going to present it the way they're saying it there. Also, although we are talking about Terramaster, some of you may know that Terramaster actually has a parent company called Noontech. Noontech has been in operation considerably longer, and Noontech ultimately are managing the whole facilities there. On top of that, when I asked them about what percentage of Terramaster's budget goes towards hardware or software, they were adamant that software occupies 80% of the spending budget on their solutions and just 20% there on the hardware. When I asked them about their long-term goals in terms of where they want to be in 5 years' time, a question I put to pretty much every brand that I spoke to here, their response was that they want to be the second place NAS brand in terms of turnkey NAS solutions within the next 5 years. So again, I presume that means they want to nip at the heels and surpass QNAP. We'll have to wait and see, but that's their ultimate goal within that period. Now, when I asked them about how they're able to achieve their price point, because I think it would be fair to say that Terramaster is one of the more cost-effective solutions in the market, at least from a fresh buyer's perspective, although their hardware admittedly has scaled up in recent years, they maintain a large part of that is simply being able to control each step of the chain and therefore have that vertical integration of the creation of the system, the development of software, and all of it being developed in-house and then crossed across the sites there. Now, when I asked them about future plans for TOS and their hardware, my main three questions were, are they going to integrate ZFS? Are they going to start engaging with AMD processor chips? And are they going to engage with AI, be it remote AI like Synology has done, or locally deploying LLMs on their systems securely and locally? To that first one, they said currently they have no plans to engage with ZFS. A large part of that would come down to refitting a lot of their system software and working backwards. They highlighted that if they do see the demand and the need and the feedback from users, then they will explore it. The same really goes for AMD processors. Their software is built predominantly on Intel platforms, and it would have a higher development cost to retool, as it were, towards AMD processors. I mean, there is the argument, the longer they wait, the harder it's going to be, but still nonetheless, they're saying that a big reason that they haven't engaged with AMD yet is it would require significant retooling and higher redevelopment costs. So at the moment, they're focusing really in on the Intel processors there and some of the ARM stuff at the value tier. Finally, with the AI LLM stuff, they did highlight they are going to be rolling out in 2026 an AI NAS. That is a NAS with a ready-to-go modeled LLM within the system for a RAG, semantic search, but also faster retrieval and system control. They highlighted specifically that although they're going to allow support for a few different models, each one is going to need to be explored for its stability, and more than likely they are going to limit the number of AI LLMs that you can use, at least out the gate, to ones that they know will work better within TOS and this AI system. Still waiting for specifications on the AI system. If I had to have a guess, it's going to be an Intel Ultra processor there. It's not going to have a graphics card, but it's too early to say. But it was interesting to see them at least exploring that avenue. Now, when I asked them about their 2025 series of devices, my main questions were, what sets it apart from the existing 2023-2024 series? And moreover, what lessons did they learn and carry over? Is this simply a rebadge with a new CPU, or is it more? They highlighted that a lot of the drive for the 2025 series, like the F4425 Plus series and stuff like that, is to do with community feedback, community data, and the requirements of end users. So for example, the replacement of the USB port there on the front rather than the back, a simple thing, but for some reason it was something they never engaged with up to that point, and it was based on users simply complaining about the lack of that facility on the desktop. The introduction of the third M.2 drive came down to users wanting to run TOS for efficiency and performance purposes on an M.2, but given that most of their systems only have the 2, and very few Terramaster systems have a PCIe upgrade, that was why they really drove towards installing that third M.2 NVMe. And when you look at the Intel Twin Lake and having only 9 lanes to play with, that was why they said they had to make a tough choice between scaling up the network connectivity further and adding that third M.2. And in the end, they opted for the third M.2, but still found some resources in the tank to add 5 gigabit networking as standard on the 2025 series moving forward, something I've commented on previously. Now, with the third M.2, they were talking about how, with the development of the hybrid series, with the M.2 slots, that DAS box, that's a combination hard drive and multiple M.2 slots, 3 or 4, they said they were bringing over a lot of the lessons they'd learned with the PCIe internal chips into this newer generation. And therefore it allows not only for better compatibility with those expansions, but also simply the way that their system is the one that's rolling out with more M.2 slots than everyone else, with the exception of Acer Store that used the Celeron and has those 4 M.2s loaded into a separate card. They're able to achieve Gen 3 times 1 speeds across the board and still have 5 gigabit networking there. Next up, in terms of hardware, there are a few different bits of hardware that they're going to be rolling out in the next 3 to 6 months. We've already mentioned an AI-powered NAS. We're still waiting on some of the hardware configuration for that locally deployed LLM, but there's also going to be a new D8 series. So the D8 series, that is their DAS series of boxes, and they're going to be the latest generation USB4v2. That is 80 gigabit USB 4, or effectively Thunderbolt 5 without the flashy name. Now they're going to be rolling out on the single chassis, something we'll talk about in a moment, but that is going to be spanning out into larger DAS boxes. Let's flick over to a recording I made in the offices at Terramaster. And talking of new products, one of the things I'd like to talk about quickly is something that I don't think get anywhere near as much attention as they deserve, and that is Terramaster's selection of DAS solutions. We've already talked about a lot of the bigger scale Thunderbolt stuff. We talked about some of the new M.2 kind of thing as they're expanding of the F series of devices. And we talked about this earlier this year. This was their D1. Do you remember? It was that 40 gigabit single bay solution there. It was the portable drive with the giant heatsink around it, and we were able to achieve sustained performance well in excess of 3,100 to about 3,300 megabytes per second there, sustained performance over the course of an hour. Now, they're expanding out that series of devices with a lesser, I would argue, a light version and a larger, beefier grown-up version here. Now, the light version here, this is taking advantage of fairly traditional standard USB 3.2 Gen 2 at 10 gigabits per second there via a USB-C connection. This one's waterproof as well, by the way, due to the sealing there of that surrounding casing. But they're also moving up towards USB 4v2. So that's effectively Thunderbolt 5, and that's going to be rocking out at 80 gigabits per second there. And inside it is running on a Gen 4 x 4 lane. Pretty rare when it comes to an external USB enclosure, and ultimately means that this is going to be achieving sustained performance, they say, of around about 7,100 to 7,400 megabytes per second, and with that arriving with sustained performance over time with passive cooling, so no active fan knocking around there in the background. Now, these two additions to that lineup are going to arrive somewhere around Q1 2026. But let's crack on with a tour of Terramaster and find out more about what's going on at their HQ, more about them, and more what's going on in 2026. Next up, let's talk about that brand new mobile application currently in development. Again, it's mainly about tightening things up, but obviously changing a lot of the layout of what we're seeing here. So the level of control, the layout of some of the options, they've definitely improved some of the localization, but also just some of the icon interface here, just the level of control and services we've got open to us here. So for example, going through managing some of our backup applications, managing some of our services here in the background, again, making sure some of the security and the permissions are all there in place and controlled by the system and what it can access. Now, with regards to the photo management there, again, thumbnail generation is pretty darn good, what's going through there. Again, cycling through some of the options there, some of the album control and just how quick that is and what can be done. Also, it's all just pretty straightforward. And more importantly, it's just a lot more intuitive of what we can see, right the way down to going through the resource monitor, cycling through real-time information about our device, again, available for iOS and Android right now. So really is kind of about tightening things up, allowing some of the control interfaces to be improved upon there. Again, just everything just being a lot clearer from what we're seeing. And also the integrated search there for individual files and features. So why don't we try something out here? So what if we just put in the word file, we can have a little look and see if it's going to cycle through. And as you can see, we're cycling through and finding the individual file types there. But as they start integrating some of those AI services that we just discussed there, it's going to be interesting to see how much of those things like RAG or semantic search, as they roll into TOS 7, is going to be integrated into this. Regardless, again, it's a very tight, put together application, and it is responsive, as you can see here. Now, yes, we are utilizing a fairly modern phone, but what you may also have noticed is we're not actually on Wi-Fi. The whole thing's being conducted there remotely on the system, which is really, really important. Now let's talk about TOS 7, because for many of us, TOS 6 doesn't even feel that old. It was actually released in the early stages of 2024, with TOS 7 reaching full release sometime in Q1 or early Q2 after the beta and the testing. So it actually works out about 2 years, as they say, between betas. Now, there were lots of changes. I will say They have definitely taken a lot of the feedback and frankly the criticism people like myself have given them about the inconsistency of the software, not just sometimes in the response times of the apps and services, but also the design philosophy. All too often in TOS 6, you would be using the apps and services and then you would open a window and then suddenly the fonts, the GUI, the graphics in general, and just a layout of icons, alignment and more would just utterly change back to TOS 5. And TOS 6 would often feel just like TOS 5.5 or something. And right now, given the preponderance of Chinese players in the NAS market, Terramaster can no longer just get by on their hardware. They just can't. Their hardware and their price point, when you've got a bevy of OS-free systems like GMK Tech and B-Link and more, and then you've got people like Zimmer OS coming into the field with their pre-built solutions, and of course Ugreen. So Terramaster is reprofiling. I put the question to them about, are they not concerned about more Chinese NAS players beating them, or at the very least nipping at their toes in terms of hardware? And they were abundantly clear. Although their hardware they're really proud of at the moment, and the 2025 series are moving forward into the rack mount arena and larger 6 and 8 bay solutions, right now they are doubling down on that software, and they've invested heavily in the graphical user interface and the experience. Hopefully something you can see on screen. Throughout the meeting I was testing TOS for a few hours there in the room, but hopefully we've got some stock footage here on screen showing you some of the apps and services. Now, they tell me that 90% of the icons in TOS 7 are brand new. They've replaced them all for consistency across the board. Alongside that, there are up to 50 new individual features and efficiencies built there in the background, with 1,000 first and second layer optimizations and an improvement in response logic up of just over 60%. They've also updated the kernel to 6.12.41, and it has seen 700 engineers work over 400 days. Again, that is what they have told me when I was speaking to Mr. Lee, their engineer. For my part, these were my observations when I was looking at TOS 7. So number one, they got rid of that horrible sad cat picture in the background. I know that sounds silly, but I used to really dislike that. They've changed the background there in terms of the responsiveness of the GUI on the desktop via the web browser. And there's a new palette of colors being used across all windows. Alongside that, the storage manager is now no longer buried in the control panel. It is its own standalone section, and it's far more intuitive, and I would argue definitely looks easier on the eyes. If you've used TOS 5 or 6, you know exactly what I mean about the real conflict with the text and the graphical images. This looks far more stylized, like something like Synology's DSM. On top of that, native search-like functionality. They've included now a standalone widget that effectively searches the whole system in a comparative way to a search engine like Google. Now, they are not reinventing the wheel here. Other brands have done that, but adding that is going to make things significantly more intuitive to those moving away from the cloud onto Terramaster services, because it will be less of a conflict moving away from, say, Google Drive onto a whole new way of searching. You can of course use the file manager as ever, but there was just a standalone search that would search everything from files to folders to applications in that Google-centric way. Also, the dynamic sidebar that you pull out, although not new because it featured in TOS 6, is far more dynamic, intuitive and customizable, that you can move it to any place on the screen. You can obviously change the number of widgets, but it now flex and changes shape accordingly to what you put inside there. It's far more rigid, and more than anything, they got rid of that horrible grey bar at the top of the screen that I remember the first time I looked at the beta and then reviewed the full release. I never liked that top bar there. It looked like it was trying to be Windows 7 or XP upside down. It didn't know whether it was trying to be Mac, Android, Windows or whatever. Now it is far better to look at, and again, looks slightly less of a conflict of design philosophies. Mounting and synchronization of SMB drives, FTP and cloud mounting drives is way more intuitively built into the File Explorer, but can also be done in the settings. Moreover, when it comes to file sharing, they've now got intuitive file locking, although that was still not quite implemented when I was looking at it. It wasn't quite right when you've got multiple files being shared by the same user. And ISO opening. This one I really liked. When you uploaded ISOs onto the system, you weren't just looking at like windows.iso or windows.img. You could go into the ISO. You could you didn't have to mount it. It was just, there's the ISO, double click, and now you can explore it just like you would a zip. And I know that sounds pretty, low grade, but if you're comparing it against desktop file explorer, sure, that is an option. You still have to unpack it. But where it comes into its own is because now they're integrating, rather than using VirtualBox, something they've done for a long time, they're now rolling out their own virtual machine manager tool. And because ABS, their large-scale multi-platform backup tool, already supports Hyper-V and other virtualized PaaS platforms, it's going to be nice to see that rolling in and integrating not only with their virtual machine manager perhaps down the road, but also the fact that the native handling of ISO images within the file manager is now a great deal more organic and, again, native and user-friendly. Also, the File Explorer has integrated tabs, so you're able to just create multiple tabs. And for those that have used NAS for a long time, you'll know that one of the banes in many of our existences is when you're using the File Explorer in the web browser, to open a new tab is actually quite complicated. And if you want to add multiple File Explorer windows, something that's incredibly easy and intuitive in Mac, Windows, etc., it's actually often quite problematic to do that on a NAS. Or in the case of the TOS 7B, it allowed me to create multiple tabs and I could just open them up just like anything else, and therefore copying and pasting between them just felt more responsive and easy to do. And again, when I was loading those ISOs or looking at activity, it just made things a lot clearer on screen. And circling back to that question of Storage Manager, again, it's a whole standalone application now. It's a single pane of glass graphical idea of what you're seeing. What I really liked, though, was this identification system, because we're used to seeing, for example, if I look at a RAID and it tells me I've got these drives in the RAID pool, or if I look at an individual drive, it might flag that this is in storage pool 1 or storage pool 2. But this allowed you to see the pathway of a drive. So for example, if I looked at a drive or a sector, or wanted to know, for example, where the operating system was, there was a flow chart that would show me, for example, drive 3 is being used in this pool, which makes up this volume. One of these is a system disk, and it created a lovely flow chart of me knowing that if a drive is in trouble, or something's, I need to remove a drive, or I want to know, for example, if a service or a process is running slow and I want to know if it's on the SSD or the hard drive, this gave me one glance to know all the truth of that. And there's also going to be an OS migration tool for those that begin their TOS installation for a while on the hard drives and want to just migrate it over to the SSD. An OS migration manager is going to be, I don't know if it's going to be in the beta, but they're saying it's going to be included by the time TOS 7 rolls out. Likewise, if you install a new disk, immediately the wizard will guide you towards whether you want to use it in a pool, use it if for cache, using it as your operating system drive, use it to expand a pool. Again, these aren't reinventing the wheel, they're just things that weren't in Terramaster's TOS system till now. The control panel is a lot clearer. I would argue it's very similar to that of Synology's DSM. Interestingly, when it came to remote access, very little has changed the way they're doing it, but now they're going to be utilizing a much tighter remote P2P protocol for better security, but also to increase the performance a little bit there. Another improvement is the resource manager. It's way, way clearer. That was one of the real areas of contention in TOS. Resource manager, if you look at the forums, sometimes it was a real pain in the bum to find out just what was going right or wrong on your system. It was a great deal clearer now to go through those options. The whole thing is just right the way down to the permission control and the file server access. If you want to know someone's accessing something or a system or resource being utilized, it's just a lot clearer in TOS 7. Again, pending the beta, pending release. The application center, If you go into the App Center, it was quite interesting that you could see which apps were native and which ones were kind of Docker splinter. So you could actually find out which ones, how they were going to run, and therefore it was just a lot clearer with icons, something that I think the techie heads will appreciate more than anything. It was just a nice touch. And finally, as mentioned, they're getting rid of VirtualBox and migrating directly over to their own virtual machine manager tool. Built on KVM technology, they're suggesting this VM tool for them is going to be way, way more efficient. That will be its own standalone video down the line. But interestingly, finally, it looks like they may engage with HDMI output on these systems, which have had HDMI for a while, but really only with containerization and virtual machine. But we'll have to still wait and see on that, how far they'll take it. And that's really it. The big focus was on TOS 7. Yes, they've got hardware rolling out, and again, there is that AI system and some new DAS boxes around the corner. But just for them, the TOS 7 is, I think they consider that to be their most important release, at least in the first half of 2026 there. And again, I know TOS has never really flourished in the way that DSM has, but I'm quietly confident about what we're seeing. Also, the mobile application, I forgot to mention, they've retweaked that single port of access to the mobile app has seen improvements there. And again, I'm sure I added that section in the video, but just in case I didn't cover it earlier on, it is, I would argue, better than it's been for a while. And that's really the key point. I think Terramaster have now got to leverage the experience they have had. And frankly, although they are clearly still aiming at Synology and aiming at QNAP, I think they need to keep a few eyes down below them, as there's a lot of little snappy fish right now biting at their heels. Visiting their HQ, I will say I was disappointed. I couldn't film more of their operations, and what footage we had was useful, but I just wish we'd been able to get a little deeper, maybe speak to a lot more of the members of the staff and the teams. There was plenty of people there. The vibe was okay. No one seemed miserable or anything like that. But I just wish we could have gone a little bit more in depth in that, and as well as seeing their production facilities. But this has been Terramaster here in Shenzhen. I don't know about you guys, I'm looking forward to seeing what TOS 7's got to offer, but they've also abundantly made it clear that they're not going to be rescinding their whole continued support for users to use third-party operating system, Unray, TrueNAS, whatever. So at the very least, it's still not a take it or leave it situation. But let me know what you guys think about this. I'm going to go jump on my plane. I've only had 4 days over here, and I've had a lot of meetings, and me and I think about 3 beers on this flight are going to have some fun. Thank you so much for watching. I'm going to put on my stupid socks, and I'll see you next time.